see you guys in the dark.
For context, I'm a 25-year-old woman who is 3 months pregnant. The two people involved in this incident are myself and my brother-in-law, who is 19. For the sake of the story, I'll just call him Jack. Jack is a very street smart, and on top of that, a brown belt in some martial arts. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I believe. So he definitely knows how to hold his own in a difficult situation. He is the outspoken younger child in his family, as compared to my husband's soft demeanor. Being only two siblings, my husband and Jack are very close. Jack currently lives with my husband and myself. I live in a small town in California, and the three of us live in a small 2-bedroom apartment. It isn't special or anything, but considering how close the three of us are, and all the fun that we have, it's definitely home. The downside of it is that while we have good neighbors and everything, the neighborhood isn't all that great. A lot of gang-related crimes have taken place over the years, and drug abuse is common on the streets. Anyway, now being pregnant, I had the usual weird cravings, and on that particular night, I was dying for some pickles. Naturally, we don't have any at our place, so the plan of action was to go get them at 1 a.m. There is a commercial area about a 25-minute walk from our apartment complex with a huge Walmart, so that is our go-to store for anything that we needed. My husband was away on a business trip for the weekend, so Jack was on my beck and call for everything. I told him about my craving, and he got ready to leave right away, not wanting to stay home alone at the time of night. I decided to go along with him. I figured the fresh air would be good for me. I felt like I could use the walk anyways, so off we went. It was a little bit chilly that night, and naturally, I didn't realize it, so I had to make do with a tank top and yoga pants. That is until Jack gave me his jacket. We had a really pleasant walk all the way to the store, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the walk in general. We got to Walmart around 1:25, maybe 1:30 a.m., and spent around half an hour there. Since I frequently visit the store a lot, I am friendly with a few of the employees working there, so I spent some time talking to them as well. Got my pickles, a few other groceries that we needed to restock on. I also got a few things off my maternity list in case I didn't forget to do so later. Jack got a few things that he needed. Saying our goodbyes, we left. I'll admit, I'm very naive, which I think is probably because of my sheltered upbringing. We were on the edge of the parking lot of the entire commercial area when we crossed a group of 4 greasy guys in their late 20s hanging around. I caught them staring, but since I had just started showing, I didn't think much about it. There weren't many cars around either, since it was very late at the night. Jack and I started our journey, cracking jokes and messing around with each other. He made a joke about naming my baby after him if I had a son. We were just goofing around. Little did I know how quickly that would change. A few minutes into the walk back home, Jack's demeanor suddenly changed. Now, I've known Jack since he was 12, and I've always known him to be very laid back and carefree. His breathing became very erratic. He was laughing way too loud at anything I was saying, and he was twirling around like he was dancing every few seconds. I thought he was just messing around with me, as I'm a dance instructor, but something just wasn't right with the way he was acting. He started laughing all of a sudden, and said I dare you to shuffle sideways across the road to the other sidewalk. I thought this was weird, but since I was in a good mood, I thought why not, and just went for it. Jack followed right next to me doing a weird dance, which really didn't make any sense. I started laughing at him when we started walking again, on the other side of the road this time. Any signs of discomfort he was showing earlier had all disappeared, so I figured he only wanted to make our tedious walk home entertaining. Okay, now back to the side road. I looked at him weirdly, and he had this wide grin on his face. Once again, I couldn't say no to him, so we did the same thing back. We both were laughing like crazy. I was in an even better mood than earlier. This time, however, I noticed that same group of 4 guys walking about 30 yards behind us. I thought that it was a bit strange, but I really didn't realize that it was that strange. Maybe they were going home too. About 10 minutes had passed since we left Walmart, and we had arrived near a residential area. Not apartment buildings, but typical California homes, with large backyards. This particular resident area was to our left, and for our apartment, We had to go straight for at least another 2 blocks. Now this is where it starts to get creepy and straight up terrifying. Instead of going straight like we were supposed to, Jack challenged me to a race. We'd turn left to one of the end of the blocks, run that length of houses, and come back. This was very strange. He was adamant about it, but there was something different this time. He still had that weird laugh going on, but his eyes told a different story. He looked desperate, as if he really wanted me to say yes. I noticed these guys were still strolling behind us, which at that point were alarm bells in my head. I agreed to the race, and he gave me a head start. I could see those guys staring at us out of the corner of my eye. They just stopped, and were simply looking in our direction, making me feel very uneasy. Jack made a big show of counting down from 3, and we took off. 5 seconds into our race, once we were out of sight, Jack put his hand over my mouth and dragged me to the house on our left, and into the bushes. I was about to scold him for cheating when he hissed at me that we were being followed. The terrified look on his face was all that I needed to see to know that he was right. I felt my heart sink down into my stomach. I could feel myself throwing up any second, and I had tears welling up. There was no time for any of that, though, because we heard voices almost instantly. Jack pushed me further under the bushes, and he positioned right next to me, both of us pretty concealed by now. Sure enough, all 4 of them had turned left onto this street, and they just stood there looking around. The streetlights were fairly dim, so it was pretty dark. One of them said, "I don't know, knocked up bitches could run this fast." Another guy mentioned something about how he thought the kid was onto them. What he said next sent shivers up my spine. "I've got my knife here for that bitch. She can't resist what I say with a knife on her throat. We'll dump the kid somewhere. Don't worry about that piece of shit." I could feel my throat closing up. It was difficult to breathe, but it wasn't over yet. Their leader decided to look around for us. They split up, and 2 of them came in our direction. My heart came all the way up into my throat as I froze. The fear of getting caught was like ice running through my veins. One of them came up and stood right next to where we were hiding, started smoking a cigarette. The other 3 were nearby, and they were going through the neighborhood looking for us. I was sure that the guy closest to us would find us, as he was only a few steps away. Jack had turned to look at me, and I could see the fear on his face. He raised his finger and signaled me to be extra quiet. The smoker was pacing around us slowly. Luckily it was dark, so that played to our advantage. After what seemed like an eternity, but what was actually about 30 minutes, they regrouped in the middle. One of them made a call, telling someone to bring the car around. Another 5 minutes had gone by when the car finally arrived, and the men all looked pissed off, drove off. It was too dark to clearly get the number plate, but I made a mental note of the model and color of the car. We waited for a while before getting out from the undergrowth and brushed ourselves off. I couldn't hold it any longer, and I burst into tears. Jack had glistening eyes as well. Hugged me, but he didn't for long. He wanted to get home as quickly as possible before those men had any chance of coming back. We got our grocery bags, which were all muddy now, and made our way back home. I felt like they would pull up behind us at any second. Luckily, though, we made it without any other further issues. I collapsed on the couch the minute that we entered and double-checked the locks. I was sobbing and trying not to throw up. Jack was trying to keep it together, but I felt like he could start crying any minute. I honestly felt so stupid and ashamed. Here I was, 6 years older than my brother-in-law, who looks at me as the older sister he never had, and he was the one consoling me. We stayed that way for a while when he told me to get some rest. It was almost 3 a.m. at this point. I didn't have the mental capacity to do anything else, so I just went to my room and passed out on the bed. I had a load of missed calls when I woke up, from my husband. Jack had called him and told him what had happened. He told me that he would be coming back that very day, which I was happy about. I also told Jack how grateful I was for him being with me. We have tried to move on from the real-life nightmare, but I still feel like something is bothering me. My apartment is on the 4th floor and has a clear view of the road outside. Now, I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I'm fairly certain that I've seen those guys coming and hanging around the apartment complex at night. I've also seen them driving slowly around in what I'm sure is the same car that I saw that night. I have never feared for my life or felt in any sort of danger the way that I have the past few days. We filed a police report, but we haven't heard anything so far. So that's my story. What still terrifies me is the fact that if I had gone alone that night, or if Jack didn't feel like going, I would probably have been assaulted, or worse, and nobody would have even known what had happened to me. I worked at a hardware store in high school. We had a number of fairly regular customers, but there was one man in his mid-30s that became a regular after I checked his items out one night. I noticed that I kept seeing him on my shift, and he would continually try to strike up awkward conversations with me, hold up the line until I told him that I had to take care of other customers. Our registers were in front of a large glass window, so anyone walking outside could see who was working. He eventually started to wait outside the window and tap on the glass to get my attention after leaving. I rode my bike to work, and getting off late at night started to terrify me. One night when I was working alone, he asked me if he could have my number and if I was 18. When I told him that I wasn't, he asked for my birthday, to which I replied some arbitrary date in the distant future. I told my boss about this interaction, and from then on she made sure that I never worked alone, and she would follow his ass anytime he entered the store to the point where he stopped coming. The day of my fake birthday, or close to it, I couldn't remember the exact date that I had given him. He came knocking on the glass again. It was busy, and my boss wasn't around, so I tried to ignore him. I eventually noticed that the knocking had stopped, and I could only assume he had made his way into the store. Very soon after, I'm greeted by his face in front of my register. He hands me a plastic grocery bag and says, "Happy 18th birthday." I'm embarrassed, so I take the bag and tell him to just please leave. When my friend and I opened up the bag after work, it contained 2 packages of fireworks and nothing else. This happened about 12 years ago, when I was around 13 years old. The memories and emotions of this incident had faded away into the back of my mind, but recently I started having flashbacks of this incident, and it led to multiple panic attacks while driving in public. After some deliberation, I thought perhaps writing about it and sharing it might actually help me feel validated with my emotions. I was 13 years old, living abroad when this happened. A little background that might help you understand the story better. I was living in an apartment complex. Every morning, the school buses would arrive at the main entrance of the entire complex and pick up the kids for school. The church I was attending at the time also operated buses to help people get back home. So every Sunday after the services were done, I would take the church bus back home. I never doubted my sense of security and safeness, since that kind of system made me feel safe and protected. That was until I met him one Sunday morning. I was a church kid, and quite involved one. I was serving the youth group as part of the welcome team for newcomers when I met him. He entered the chapel with his mother following behind, and she explained that they had recently moved to the country, and they were starting to settle down. My first impression of him was that he was lanky, shy, and very quiet. He seemed so harmless, innocent, naive. So when his mother left him after filling out the form, I gave him a smile, greeted him, led him to an empty chair, and I thought nothing more of him until I saw him again in my small group. So I greeted him again, saying something like, "So nice to see you again." I still remember how he just shyly nodded, not really answering me. When the small group time ended, I took out Hai Chew, Korean soft candy by the way, and gave one to everyone in the group, even the teacher. And as I handed the rectangular candy to him, he softly whispered, "Thank you," and then he walked away. That was the first time that I ever heard him speak. I hadn't realized that he was living in the same complex as me until I got off the church bus and saw him coming down the steps of the bus as well. It was a funny coincidence, so I told him how weird it was that we were in the same small group and also living in the same complex. He nodded. I walked off first because he was waiting for his mom and little sister who were coming behind him. My apartment building was number 20, the first in the row of buildings. I had opened up the door and was about to go in when he followed behind me. Still in that newcomer greeting mode, responded to this by asking if he was living in the same building as me. He nodded. I noticed that his mother and sister were not here yet, so I got into the elevator first, asked him if he was going to wait for them, and gave him my goodbye when he slightly nodded yes. The next day, I saw him waiting in the lobby when I got out of the elevator. He was alone, and I asked him if he was waiting for his sister. He nodded, so I just gave him a quick, "Have a nice day," and ran off so that I wouldn't miss my school bus. And for every day of that week, I saw him waiting for his sister in the lobby, standing in the corner in front of the elevator. I didn't think much of it. I would just say hi or good morning to him, and he would just nod or wave timidly. There was nothing more to it than that. That is until one Sunday when I got back home after church. He was walking behind me, and this time together with his sister and mom. So I thought that I would be a nice girl and hold the door for them. So I waited, holding the door open, only to have all three of them walk right past my building. Strange, I thought. So I peeked my head out to see what they were entering, and it was building number 15, which was 5 buildings down the street. At first, I didn't think about it, thinking that they might have moved out of the building and into building 15. But then I stepped out of the elevator the next morning to see him again in the lobby, in the same corner that he was standing in every morning. My heart sank deep. I don't know how I responded to it, but I remember choosing not to confront him because I was in denial that this was actually happening and didn't have the courage to ask him for an answer. Things quickly progressed since that day. I started getting late-night calls to my cell phone, the typical not going to speak, but just going to breathe heavily kind of call that you get that makes you feel insecure, even though you know that you are safe in your room. He also stopped waiting for me in the lobby since that morning, but would stand in the far corner of the street every day and wait and watch for me to get off the bus. Me becoming hyper-vigilant didn't help with the situation either. I would always spot him watching me, even though he would often try to hide behind a thick tree or a guard's cabin. It made me feel sick to my stomach, but I didn't think that I felt threatened. Not so that I wanted to seek adult help. I was a very, very private teenager who was already keeping some traumatic experience as a secret from my parents. So naturally, this felt like another secret that I would keep so that they wouldn't worry about me. At church, I kept up my bright facade, but I would also distance myself as far as possible to avoid any sort of contact with him. I actively put this distance between him and me, because whenever I decided to play by my facade and say hi to him, instead of returning my greetings, he would stare once at my face, and thus drop his gaze down to my private areas. The fact that this is summer, and I was wearing shorts, did not help at all whenever he stared at my thighs and between my legs. The embarrassment, the feeling that I was being dirtied by his gaze, the anxiety, the paranoia, it was just too much for me. I started skipping the small group sessions and left right after the youth group ended so that I would avoid getting home with him at the same time. On days that I did happen to attend small group, I just sat there quietly, unwilling to speak a single word while he stared at me intensely. One day, while the teacher was leading the discussion, he suddenly burst into an angry yell, shouting, "Why do you keep ignoring me when you clearly know that I like you?" Needless to say, I was embarrassed, ashamed, shocked, and terrified all at the same time. The teacher tried to de-escalate the situation, but he stormed out after yelling out how frustrated he was with me for not returning his affection. I wanted to leave as well, but the fear that I might run into him made me stay in my seat while everyone in the group quietly whispered among themselves about the sudden drama that happened before them. It was a huge shock to me that he was doing all these things because he liked me, but what shook me more at that moment was the fact that the teacher didn't seem to be fazed at all by the sudden outburst. She didn't seem surprised by the fact that he had such feelings for me. Instead, she casted glances at me with some sort of knowing in her eyes. I had also wondered how he got a hold of my phone number. This was it. The teacher dismissed everyone, but asked me to stay. I was always the model student at church, but the moment that I left alone with her, I lost it. I cursed and swore, and demanded her to tell me if she knew. If she knew how much he was making my life miserable. She told me that she knew he liked me. Apparently he started liking me because of that stupid-ass candy that I gave him the first day. She had given him my number, because she thought it was cute seeing him like me so much. So I told her what he has been doing. How he waited for me every morning in the lobby, even though he lived in a different building. How he would stare and watch me from the corner of the street. How he would stare between my thighs and my chest, and how he would call me late at night with the heavy breathing and all. I was having trouble speaking and breathing because of how much I was crying, but I remember yelling, "He is like a fucking stalker," and that was when I fully realized that I was being stalked. When I became quiet due to the shock of realization, the teacher took her chance to speak and told me that he was a mentally troubled kid who didn't know better, so I needed to just bear with it. That was the end of the conversation. Honestly, there is a gap in my memory after that day, so it's hard for me to recall the events that happened that led up to it. But the last time that I saw him was when I had the most fearful encounter with him. I was already on the church bus, waiting. There were 2 girls sitting a couple rows ahead of me, and the bus was silent other than that. I was sitting by the aisle when I saw him get on the bus. The strange thing was, when he got on, the 2 girls suddenly turned extremely hostile towards him and told him to get the fuck off the bus, calling him a pervert. He responded angrily, "Well, you whores aren't the ones that I want to see anyways, so shut up." This was the first time that I heard him speak such profanities, so I was shocked. When he fixed his eyes straight at me, walked over to where I was, and sat a row diagonally behind my seat, my heart was pounding at this point, and I wanted to sit by the window to hide from his gaze, but I was scared that he would think of it as an invitation to sit next to me. So I stayed frozen in my seat until more people came in, and only moved to the window seat when an adult asked if they could sit next to me. I think there was an instinctive feeling that told me that I couldn't get off together with him, so I purposely got off at the stop before my apartment. It was only a 600-meter walk from the bus stop to my home, so I mixed in with the people and got off the bus with them. The bus had stopped by the side of the entrance of another apartment complex. I just needed to walk down the street to get to mine, but the street was empty and deserted. But it was one of those areas that were waiting to be developed by the city. So I started walking towards my home when I realized that he had also gotten off with me. He was walking a few feet behind me, and my gut wrenched as he got closer and closer. Something told me being alone with him on this street was dangerous, so I broke into a run until I saw an alleyway that parted off from the road. In my panic, I turned into the alley and was relieved when I saw that there were some smaller shops that were busy with people. There were people hanging in the alleyway, chilling by the benches outside and stuff. I was certain that he wouldn't have followed me into the alley after I had ran, but still looked behind to check just in case. But there he was, still following me. He had run after me. My relief quickly turned into terror, and I hastened my pace, purposely weaving in between the people in hopes of losing him. But whenever I looked back, I would still see him. Eventually the people hanging by the shops thinned out, and I was walking in an empty alleyway on the opposite of the alley. I could see that there was a bigger road with more cars and people. I was already quite out of breath, as I wasn't a fit person, but my last strength I ran for the busy road, hoping to lose him if he was still behind me. I stopped once I reached the busy road, and turned around to look into an empty alley. I stood for an extra minute, staring into the alley to confirm that he wasn't following me. Fortunately, my friend's house was close by, so I stayed at her place until I felt like it was safe enough to walk back home. That was the last time that I saw him. I stopped going to the small groups. I started serving small children's department so that I could avoid going to the youth group. I didn't see him again after that, but one time I happened to meet my small group teacher, and she told me that he had left the country. Apparently he was reported multiple times at school for lewd behavior, such as sneaking into the girls' restroom. That's why the girls on the bus were grossed out by him, and in the end had to be expelled from school. I think that was when I decided to bury the terror and the fear away, because he was no longer an immediate threat in my life. Funny story though, after that whole incident, I had to watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off at school. But the moment Ferris's friend Cameron Fry showed on the screen, I had to run to the bathroom to throw up, because the actor's face looked exactly like him, and just watching his face brought back the trauma. Now I can watch the movie, but looking at Cameron's face still gives me anxiety. Anyways, I often wonder what might have become of him, and wonder if his parents knew what his son was. If he was truly suffering from mental illness, My only hope that he received the proper treatment so that no one else had to go through what I had to. It was my first real full-time job after college. I went to school for art, but the job was basically an admin, along with a bunch of random responsibilities. At least once a week, I worked in the warehouse, counting and organizing inventory. A coworker of mine started hanging around and seemed like he wanted to be friends. He was very helpful with the job, having been there for a while and knowing the ins and outs of the company. His name was Tim. He was 46, lived in his mom's basement, had never been married. He had a cat that he talked about often and claimed he used to be a Hell's Angel. He drove 18-wheelers and thought that they were super cool. He started offering to smoke me out on lunch breaks, which I would accept because duh, and then started buying me lunch, stating my friend did this for me when I was your age. I'm just paying it forward. One day, you can help someone else when you have the money to spend on them. He knew all the local places to eat, and would choose a place, suggesting that I would try. It was a mistake to ever accept anything from him, but I'm a foodie, and he introduced me to things like Cuban espresso and burger buffets, adding excitement to my other monotonous workday. Around that time, our friend's cat had several kittens. One of them was a beautiful turdy, which is a penny cat, that I knew Tim would love. So I fostered her for a bit until he decided that he wanted her and came over to pick her up. She got along with the other cat. It was super sweet. He loved her and would send me pictures of her and them together all the time. We had him over, my boyfriend and I, a few times over a period of about a year. He told the same stories over and over again, but we tolerated him because we thought that he was lonely. I made him a dating profile because he often spoke about how he wanted to meet the one, but he rejected every single woman that he matched with. He would pick their appearance apart on beautiful women who were his age group, even some much younger. Now, when I say Tim is an unattractive man, please trust me. He was gross, overweight, sweaty, had thick, coarse black hair, and a huge gap in his incisors that he would suck spit through after he laughed, licking his teeth. He had giant pores and moles, and he was just old. He did have many enjoyable conversations, but I started to get the creepy vibes. For my birthday that year, he bought me a first edition of my favorite book, after I had told him the story about how I lost my mass-produced book. I had exchanged favorite books with my friend, who ended up losing my favorite book. He also bought me a necklace that was for cancer survivors, which was very sweet, but also kinda really personal and awkward, but still seemed innocent enough. He would show up with a case of beer, knocking on the door unexpectedly. He tried to be hospitable, but it started getting annoying. However, I felt bad for him, and he was always so overly nice and helpful at work that I felt bad turning him away. One day after we had lunch, while sitting in his truck in our work parking lot, he told me he thought that I was the one. I reminded him about my boyfriend, and he said, "No, he's not right for you. You're supposed to be with me." "No, Tim, you know that I care about you as a friend, and I'm not interested in anything with you like that. You're making me very uncomfortable. I love you. I can take care of you. Think of all that I can do for you. I have X amount of money in savings. Please stop. This is getting weird. I don't like you like that at all. Drop it." I got out of the truck and shut the door. The storm was now brewing. After he confessed his love for me, I told my husband, which was then my boyfriend, everything. He had warned me, and he reminded me how he called it, how he always knew that this would happen, that Tim's creepy, that I shouldn't have accepted all that food and gifts. He was totally right. I felt sick. I started putting distance between Tim and I, while still being kind and sociable at work. I told my husband everything. Tim would call me over and over again, even though I always ignored his call, until one night we got sick of it. I answered the phone and told him to stop calling me. He was crying and begging me to talk to him. My boyfriend took the phone and told him to fuck off and hung up. That's when the threats started. He would leave voicemails about how he couldn't stand to look at Penny and how he was going to take her in the woods and kill her, or he would just let her free. She would be eaten by wild animals since she was still so small. He said that she reminded him of me. and that he hated her as much as he hated me, and that he wanted to bash her brains in. I started to call into work sick. I didn't want to see him. He ignored me deliberately, which I appreciated. He wouldn't look at me, but acted normal besides a sudden coldness towards me. Seeing him was awful. I ended up getting laid off. Tim had other coworkers try to contact me on his behalf. People reaching out, telling me that I needed to call him, that he's hurt by my sudden leaving. I would get calls from random phone numbers in my area. And it would be Tim. I would hang up as soon as I heard him say hello. I changed my phone number. We moved across the country. It was maybe a year later. He somehow found my new number and called again, leaving this huge voicemail. He said he had found the one, but also he was dying. I can't remember how or why he was dying. It's all hazy now, but he needed this innovation technology or surgery that happened to be only available in my town, in my state 1,000 miles away from where he lived. And we worked together a year before, and he wanted to meet up. It was all such a coincidence, and he was so excited to catch up and introduce me to his pregnant fiancée. He also needed my address. At this time, I was pregnant with my first and only child. Tim said his fiancée was pregnant too, that we would be parents at the same time. At that moment, I blocked every single person I had ever known from the town on Facebook. Every single person that knew Tim, that he could have gotten information from. I changed my phone number yet again. The nightmare started of him showing up in the middle of the night, having somehow found us, of him carrying a case of beer, hanging on the door, sucking spit through his teeth. I felt like he wanted to find me so that he could get back at me somehow. Looking back, he was a total incel. I don't know if any of his story was true or what his plans really were. Anyways, fuck that dude.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.